Sometimes fear doesn't scream. It whispers with the soft voice of prudence. It says it's better to wait a little longer, that now is not the right time, that maybe the scenario will change, the conditions will improve, the mind will calm down, the heart will settle. And you listen. You listen because it sounds logical, reasonable, mature. But behind this rationalized prudence, there's an invisible prison binding you with chains made of well-crafted excuses. It's not that you don't want to live. You're just waiting. Waiting for the planets to align, for the perfect motivation, the right spark, the courage that never arrives on its own. And while you wait, time passes, silent and relentless, taking with it the opportunities you postponed in the name of a safer tomorrow. The promise of when I'm ready becomes a vicious cycle that paralyzes, suffocates, and keeps you exactly where you are. It's easy to deceive yourself when the excuse sounds virtuous. Saying you're waiting for the right time sounds noble. It gives the illusion of a plan, a logic, a careful strategy. But what many call caution is, in fact, fear in disguise. It's the terror of trying and failing, of exposing yourself and being judged, of falling and not knowing how to recover. That's why it feels safer to stay where you are. Dream big, but act small. Have brilliant ideas, but lock them away. Because that way, no one can criticize you. Because that way, you can still believe it would have worked, if only you had started. The problem is that if never builds anything. If is a paralyzing fantasy, a utopia of perfect control, where everything happens at the right time, with no risk, no mistakes. But that perfect time doesn't exist, and the more you wait for it, the further you drift from real life. Real life doesn't follow a schedule. It happens in chaos, improvisation, trial and error. It never warns you when you're ready, because you never are. No one is. Everyone starts afraid, full of doubts, with a million uncertainties in their pockets. What separates those who live from those who only dream isn't readiness. It's movement. It's the choice to act even while shaking, to take a step without seeing the next, to allow yourself to begin, knowing you might fail, might regret it, but at least you tried. Because the greatest failure isn't making mistakes. It's having no story to tell. It's reaching the end and realizing that fear stopped you from living what could have been. And when you understand this, the questions begin. Am I being prudent, or am I just hiding? Is this waiting a plan, or an escape? Is this time I say I need truly for preparation, or just to delay the inevitable? There's no simple answer, but there is one uncomfortable truth. Those who live waiting for the perfect moment almost always die with everything unfinished. Half-done projects, half-lived relationships, dreams shelved, desires silenced, because the right time, more often than not, is just a pretty disguise for saying, I'm too afraid to try right now. And it's okay to feel fear, but fear must not be the one making your decisions. On the outside, maybe no one notices. Maybe they even praise your caution, your planning, your strategic mindset. But inside, you know, something is stuck. Something wants to be born, something you're holding back. And the more you hold it in, the more distant from yourself you feel. Because waiting too long for the right time isn't just wasting time. It's wasting life. And in the end, there is no better time than now. Even if now is uncertain, even if now is scary, because it is in the now that things truly begin. And if you don't begin, you'll never leave the place you're in. There's a very seductive illusion hidden in the idea of being ready. A belief silently nurtured by those who dream too much and move too little. Believing that it's only worth acting when you've learned everything, mastered everything, organized everything. When fear is gone, self-confidence is intact. The environment is favorable and everyone around approves of your decision. But that moment never comes, because being ready is a concept that doesn't exist outside of fantasy. The truth is, we don't even feel ready for the good things in life. We don't feel ready to be truly loved, to expose ourselves, to change careers, to speak our minds, to face our own ghosts, because readiness doesn't come before action. Readiness is born in the process. It comes when you begin, stumble, learn, and repeat. It's when improvisation shapes you more than any plan. But perfectionism, sneaky and persuasive, convinces you that you can only show yourself to the world when you're flawless. As if there were an ideal version of you that, once achieved, would guarantee automatic success. And you chase that unreachable image with discipline and guilt. You study more, read more, research more, reassess risks, scribble new goals, but you don't act. Because it's still not enough, it never is. And maybe you don't even notice that this not being ready has become your excuse to avoid pain, to avoid frustration, to avoid disappointment in your own limitations. It's a shield against the possibility of discovering that even trying you might fail. But what hurts more, failing while trying or living forever in the promise of something that never happened. The myth of being ready is also fueled by the fear of judgment. Because if I start now, they'll see my mistakes. They'll notice I don't know everything. They'll compare me to those already light years ahead. So it's better to hide, better to wait, better to stay silent, where there's still hope that one day I'll be prepared enough to be admired instead of questioned, but that day never comes. And while it doesn't, life goes on. Others less prepared than you move forward. They start, they fall, they learn, they grow. Meanwhile, you fill yourself with plans and empty yourself of experiences. Everything stays in your head, but nothing reaches the real world, because the real world isn't built by those who know everything. It's built by those who try, even knowing very little. And here comes the truth no one likes to hear. You will never feel ready, not even when you are, not even when you have more time, more money, more support. Because what's holding you back isn't a lack of preparation. It's the belief that you need a guarantee, a certainty, approval. But living isn't about guarantees. It's about risk. It's about accepting that you'll learn along the way and that, yes, it might hurt. It might not work the first time. It might scare you. But even so, it's better than living in a constant wait for an ideal state that only exists in imagination. What keeps you from living isn't what you lack. It's what you're waiting to magically appear before you begin. So if you're waiting for the moment when you'll feel absolutely secure to act, stop. That moment isn't coming, and that's okay. Because courage was never the absence of fear. It's always been acting despite it. The truth is, you already have enough to take the first step. Maybe not enough to conquer everything, but enough to begin. And beginning changes everything. That's when you discover who you really are, not who you idealize yourself to be when and if you become perfect. Sometimes the mind convinces itself that it's just resting, organizing ideas, calmly getting ready. But deep down, the body knows you're delaying. And not because you're lazy, careless, or lack ambition, but because you're afraid. Because starting something also means putting yourself at risk. Risk of failing, risk of being criticized, risk of being disappointed. And procrastination, though it may look like a distraction, addiction, or a sign of disorganization, is often a highly sophisticated psychological defense mechanism, a silent way of protecting yourself from the pain that could come from trying and not succeeding, from frustration, from facing your own limitations. So you don't begin. Or you begin halfway, and you stay in a comfortable limbo where nothing hurts, but nothing grows either. It takes courage to see procrastination as a symptom and not a character flaw, because it often points to something deeper: insecurity, low self-esteem, rejection trauma, past failures that still bleed inside. The mind associates action with pain, and instinctively, it flees. It gets distracted, finds other urgencies, gets busy with peripheral tasks, spends the day solving what's secondary, because facing what's essential means confronting fear head-on. And that fear, though invisible, is heavy. It's the fear that things won't work out, or worse, that they will, and you won't know how to handle it. Because it's not just failure that's frightening. Success also brings pressure, expectation, visibility, responsibility. So sometimes the mind chooses not to risk it, and we call that leaving it for later. And the cruelest part is that procrastination also comes with guilt. You don't do what needs to be done, and then punish yourself for it. You call yourself weak, stupid, incapable. You compare yourself to those who've already started, who've already succeeded. But no one sees the internal war that takes place before the first step. No one sees how much you fight yourself to overcome the fear of failing. And instead of embracing that fear and trying to understand it, you ignore it and judge yourself. And that judgment paralyzes you even more. It becomes a self-feeding cycle. Fear, delay, guilt, shame, and more fear, until you get used to living below your potential, as if that were normal, as if postponing your own life were a permanent condition, not a temporary state. The truth is, no one procrastinates for pleasure. Procrastination is a muffled cry from the body, asking for safety. Our shield that says, "Let me stay here where it's safe, where no one judges me, where I can still dream without disappointment." But that safe place is also a place of stagnation, an emotional desert where ideas dry up and dreams wither. And there comes a moment when you realize delaying hurts too, but it's a quiet pain, one that eats away little by little. The pain of watching life pass you by. The pain of looking inward and knowing you could be living so much more, feeling so much more, accomplishing so much more, if you weren't afraid. You don't need to eliminate fear to begin. You just need to understand that it exists and that you're not alone. Everyone who builds something meaningful feels that same anxiety. The difference is that some freeze and others learn to walk while trembling. The first step doesn't have to be big. It just has to be real. Because it's through movement that courage grows, and it's through movement that procrastination begins to lose power. Action is not the reward of feeling safe. It's the medicine for fear. And even if it feels small, taking action is always more than waiting, organizing, structuring, outlining. At first glance, planning seems like a virtue, and many times it is. But there's a fine, almost invisible line between planning and running away, between getting prepared and hiding. Many people confuse productivity with real progress. They spend days creating spreadsheets, writing down goals, drafting perfect timelines, revising strategies. Everything looks extremely focused and efficient, but behind all that structure lies an uncomfortable truth. Nothing actually moves, because when planning becomes an end in itself, it turns into a sophisticated trap, a castle of ideas that never touches the ground of reality. And this planned paralysis is an elegant way to avoid risk, to appear busy, committed, even visionary, while remaining completely still on the inside. This kind of escape is especially sneaky because it gives the false impression that you're doing something, and in a way you are, but what you're doing has no impact in the real world. It's like swimming in an imaginary pool. It tires you out but takes you nowhere. And worse, it masks your fear. The fear of truly starting, of dealing with the unpredictable, of no longer having the excuse of "I'm getting organized." Because once you start, the game changes. You become visible, vulnerable to mistakes, to being seen, to criticism, to real exhaustion. And that's where resistance hides. It's easier to live in the realm of ideas. It's more comfortable to be the genius who hasn't acted yet than to be the beginner who's fallen 3 times. Endless planning is the mental version of a comfort zone. There's an almost addictive pleasure in planning. It gives a false sense of control, of safety, even superiority. You feel ahead, like you're being proactive, like you're doing it right. But here's the painful question. What if all of this is just fear in disguise? Fear of not being able to handle it, fear of not being as good as the plan demands, fear of failing once it's put into practice. So instead of simplifying and taking the first step, you complicate it. You make everything so complex, full of phases and prerequisites, that it starts to seem impossible. And in the end, you give up before even trying. Because the plan became a maze, not a path. The perfectionist mind loves this trap, because it feeds on the illusion that if you prepare enough, you'll avoid pain, error, and shame. But life isn't a script you control from start to finish. It's full of variables and it demands constant adaptation. And that's something you only learn by doing. It doesn't matter how much you read, watch, or listen. The deepest learning only comes through action, through trial and error, through repetition. What truly makes the difference isn't the plan, it's the practice. And ironically, the best plans almost always come after you've already begun. So if you're stuck in eternal planning, maybe you're trying to control what can only be revealed on the journey. Maybe you're trying to guarantee an outcome without living the process. And that doesn't exist. There's no plan that can shield you from frustration. There's no plan that can replace courage. At some point, you'll have to leave strategy and step onto the battlefield, even without all the answers, even without being 100% sure, even while trembling, because that's what truly makes the difference. Not the perfect plan, but the imperfect decision to move. Perfectionism is one of the most elegant disguises of self-sabotage. It arrives dressed as ambition, speaks with the voice of excellence, and presents itself as a high standard of quality. But beneath this polished surface lies a slow-acting poison. Because perfectionism doesn't seek the best, it seeks the unattainable. And since no one ever reaches the unattainable, it keeps you constantly dissatisfied, always feeling behind, always restarting things that were nearly done. It makes you believe that everything must be absolutely flawless before it can be shown, lived, or started. And so you spend your life endlessly editing, revising, improving, but never finishing, never publishing, never allowing yourself to simply be. The trap of perfectionism is that it's often praised. Perfectionists are seen as organized, meticulous, detail-oriented, but no one sees the invisible side of this story, the exhaustion, the insecurity, the paralyzing anxiety, the relentless self-pressure. Because the perfectionist is never satisfied. There's always a flaw, a detail to tweak, a reason to delay. What could be a small adjustment becomes an excuse to start everything over, not because the project is bad, but because the mind always demands more, and that more never ends. It's a bottomless pit, where even the great seems not good enough. Perfectionism also hides a deep fear of rejection, because if I deliver something that's not perfect, I might be criticized. People might see I made mistakes, that I missed something, that I wasn't good enough. And that fear is so overwhelming that sometimes it feels safer not to try at all, better to stay in the realm of ideas, where there's still a chance of one day being brilliant. Because in the real world, mistakes are inevitable. But in the perfectionist's mind, mistakes are unacceptable. That's why it freezes, it shuts down, it avoids starting just to escape the responsibility of finishing. But the end, even if flawed, is what transforms the idea into reality. And reality, even full of flaws, is far more powerful than theoretical perfection. Perfectionism also steals your lightness. Everything becomes an impossible mission. A simple text turns into a thesis. A spontaneous video becomes a cinematic production. A sincere conversation becomes a rehearsed script. You pile on layer after layer of pressure until the simple becomes too heavy to handle. And then comes paralysis, because the weight of "it has to be perfect" is so great that any attempt feels small, ridiculous, unworthy. You begin to sabotage yourself in silence, not out of laziness, but because the standard you created has become unreachable. And when the standard is unreachable, movement vanishes. The cure for perfectionism isn't abandoning care or dedication. It's understanding that excellence is not the absence of error, it's the presence of commitment. It's allowing yourself to be seen incomplete, but authentic. It's putting into the world what is possible now, knowing it could be even better later. It's learning to trust that growth comes with time, not with obsession. Because what helps you evolve isn't fear of mistakes. It's constant practice. It's the act of trying, adjusting, continuing. And none of that happens if you insist on only showing up when you're perfect. There is a silent pain that almost no one admits. The fear of starting small. The fear of being seen at the beginning, when everything is still uncertain, when ideas are still raw, when the result is far from ideal. The shame of looking amateurish. Of launching something simple and hearing, "Is that it?" Of showing a draft project and comparing yourself to those already shining on stage. And that fear suffocates you, because it doesn't just say, "They'll laugh at you," it whispers something even crueler. You're not worthy of starting. And when you believe that, you go quiet. You shrink. You keep your dreams tucked away until, maybe one day, you reach a level where no one can criticize you. But that day never comes. Because without starting small, you'll never truly grow. The culture of instant success feeds this fear. Social media shows only the after, the peak, the applause, the big numbers, the polished feed. Few show the backstage of shame, doubt, or failure. So you compare yourself to people who are in the middle or end of their journey, forgetting that everyone started somewhere. Everyone had a first post, a first video, a fragile first attempt. But comparison swallows you whole. You think you can't show up with simple content, a raw idea, or an unfinished project, so you choose to wait. Wait until you have a better logo, a better setup, a flawless strategy. And while you wait, time passes, and with it, your chance to build something real. Starting small hurts because it exposes you. It exposes your vulnerability, your lack of experience, your improvisation, but it also reveals your courage, because there's nothing more beautiful than someone who shows up trembling, who shares their rough draft with pride, who says, This is the best I can do for now, and that's okay. The beginning is imperfect by definition, and it needs to be, because that's where identity is formed, where direction is tested, where you discover what works and what doesn't. If you wait to be big before starting, you'll never get off the ground. Greatness begins in smallness. Sophistication is born from simplicity, and elegance learns to walk in clumsy shoes. And the saddest part is that often, your harshest critic in the beginning is just a voice echoing inside you. It's your own fear dressed up as someone else's opinion. It's your insecurity projecting judgments no one actually made. Because the truth is, most people are too busy with their own lives to judge you the way you think. And even if they do, that doesn't define your worth. Those who mock someone for starting reveal more about their own cowardice than about your project. What you're creating doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be done. It needs to be released. It needs to exist, even with missteps. True respect comes with time, but it starts when you respect yourself first, when you show up, even if no one applauds, when you acknowledge your limitations but don't hide behind them, when you accept that small also has value, that the beginning is also worthy, that a timid step is still a step. And it's this courage to be seen starting that separates dreamers from doers. Anyone who builds something great was once ridiculous to someone, was once mocked, was once ignored, but they kept going. They persisted, they grew, and one day, they shone. There's a promise many people silently make to themselves, the one that starts with, "I'll start on Monday. Next month I'll change. On New Year's everything will be different." And for a moment, it even feels sincere. You believe it. You visualize the results. You feel a little spark of excitement, but that promise keeps getting postponed, until it becomes a habit, a lifestyle. And without realizing it, you get used to living in the almost. Almost did it. Almost started. Almost made it. You start existing in a time that hasn't arrived, while the present slips through your fingers. Because when later becomes a routine, the now loses its value, and you become an expert in waiting, and in feeling frustrated for never moving forward. The cruelest part of this internal promise is that it sounds kind. It doesn't say, "You're a failure." It says, "It's just not the right time yet." It doesn't say, "You're worthless." It says, "You'll do it properly later." And that calms the mind. It eases the guilt. It brings temporary relief, but it also dulls your urgency. Because the more you feed that future hope, the less energy you have to act now. And then a vicious cycle begins. You don't start because you believe it's not the right time, and that frustrates you, overwhelms you, distances you even more from the starting point. In the end, the promise becomes a prison. It gives the illusion of control, but steals your freedom to act. And time, that invisible, merciless agent, doesn't wait. While you delay, the days go on. Opportunities pass. Courage wears out. Excitement fades. And eventually you realize that it's been months, maybe years of saying you'll start next week. But commitments pile up, fears grow stronger, self-esteem weakens. What once was just a delay turns into an existential block. You begin to doubt yourself, to think you're too old, too late, too untalented. But it all started with that first decision to postpone, that seemingly harmless promise that became your default mode. What you don't realize is that every time you postpone something important, you send yourself a message. "I don't trust me. I won't be able to handle it. I'm not a priority." And those messages pile up. They take root until they become internal truths. And even when time, money, or motivation show up, the self-sabotage is already done. You've convinced yourself that you're not someone who starts, and that's a lie that traps you. Because the only thing stopping you from breaking that cycle is you. The perfect moment doesn't exist outside your decision, and change doesn't happen when everything aligns. It begins when you, despite everything, choose to act. The decision to start doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't have to involve grand promises or 5-year plans. It can be simple. Start today with what you have. Do it badly, but do it. Don't wait another month, another week, another perfect moment. Because what changes a life isn't a magical shift in the calendar. It's a movement. It's the courage to break your own promise to wait. It's telling yourself, no more postponing, and taking a step. Small, shaky, messy, but real. Because that step, and only that step, is the beginning of everything you say you want. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, but from the mind. A fatigue no one sees because it happens silently. Between self-blaming thoughts, goals you invented yourself, and the constant feeling that it's still not enough. This is the weight of self-demand, a burden many people carry with a smile on their face while falling apart inside. It doesn't matter how much they do, produce, or try. The inner voice always wants more, always says something is missing, that it could have been better, that it should have started earlier, that it's too late. And that ongoing pressure doesn't motivate you, it paralyzes you, because living under constant demand isn't the same as living with discipline. It's living with fear, fear of disappointing, of failing, of being found out as just ordinary. Self-demand doesn't scream, it whispers as you try to sleep. It makes you replay every word you said, rethink every choice, punish every moment of rest. It turns leisure into guilt, pause into weakness, and mistakes into catastrophe. And that drains your energy, because you spend more time judging yourself than actually living, more time criticizing than creating. The result is a racing mind, an anxious heart, and a body that's exhausted even at rest. Perfectionism pressures you, fear feeds it, and self-esteem withers, until one day you get so used to that voice that you think it's you, that this absurd pressure is a sign of strength, that living in constant self-conflict is normal, but it's not. Living in constant self-demand is like trying to swim with a backpack full of rocks. You may move, but you don't move forward. Or worse, you sink, because pressure doesn't prepare you better. It breaks you. It disconnects you from spontaneity, from creativity, from lightness. And without lightness, everything becomes inhuman effort. Even the things that once brought you joy start to feel like obligations. Everything is a target. Everything is a result. Everything gets measured. And slowly you stop being someone who lives and become someone who just performs. That self-pressure is also born from comparison, looking to the side and seeing people doing, creating, achieving, and then you ask yourself, why am I not at that pace? And you forget that everyone has their own time, their own story, their own path, but pressure doesn't care about your context. It demands constant performance. And the worst part? It's never satisfied. Even when you get what you wanted, the inner voice shifts the goal. Now that you've done this, what's next? And so rest becomes a threat. Because if you stop, maybe you'll collapse. Maybe people will realize you weren't that good, so you keep going. Driven by fear, not passion. Healing begins when you realize that this pressure isn't a sign of strength, it's a survival mechanism. That being kind to yourself isn't laziness, it's wisdom. That resting isn't giving up, it's sustaining. That you can want more, grow, evolve, without destroying yourself in the process. Self-compassion isn't the opposite of effort, it's the foundation of healthy effort. When you learn to treat yourself with the same care you'd offer someone you love, everything changes. Productivity stops being punishment, mistakes stop being a life sentence, and the present stops being just a hallway to the future and becomes a place you're finally allowed to live in. Few pains are as silent as the one felt by someone who knows they have talent, who feels they could be doing so much more, yet can't seem to move. It's an anguish without a name, a tight knot in the chest every time the mind dreams big, but the body doesn't follow. You see yourself full of incredible ideas, grand plans, a deep desire to change your reality. And still, you remain where you are. Not because you lack ability, but because of a paralysis that feels inexplicable. As if an invisible force field stood between you and the world, an emotional block that keeps you from taking even the first small step. What makes it even more painful is the awareness. You know you could. You know you'd manage. You know you have what it takes, or at least more than many who've already started, but that knowing doesn't translate into action, and that silently hurts, because each day spent stuck increases the frustration. Each new week feeds the feeling of waste. And you start looking at yourself with suspicion, doubting your own potential, asking yourself, am I really all I think I am, or have I just been fooling myself? And that doubt paralyzes you even more, because when you start to doubt your power, it begins to fade. This kind of emotional paralysis often has deep roots. It can stem from past failures, childhood criticism, unmet expectations. Maybe you were taught not to stand out, or not to fail, or never to disappoint anyone. And now every time you try to move forward, something inside you screams, "Be careful," as if success would bring punishment or failure would bring shame. The mind learns to associate action with risk, and for protection, it shuts down, pretends it's waiting for the right time, pretends it still needs to plan. But deep down, it's trying to survive the fear of getting hurt again. The problem is that this paralysis becomes identity. You begin defining yourself by what you haven't done yet. And you forget everything you've lived, everything you've built, everything you've overcome. You become stuck in a frozen self-image where movement seems impossible, and time reinforces that prison. Because the more you delay, the harder it feels to begin, and the harder it feels, the further away you are from proving to yourself that you can. It's a cycle of pain, paralysis, guilt, low self-esteem, and more paralysis, until life itself becomes a constant effort to hide how stuck you really feel. But what you need to understand is that your ability doesn't vanish with inactivity. It's still there, alive, intact, just buried beneath fear and doubt, and it can be recovered. Not through big achievements, but through small gestures. Start with what you can, deliver what you have, accept that even while feeling stuck, it's still possible to move, because action doesn't need permission, it only needs a decision. And even if that decision comes shaky, it's already powerful. Because every time you act despite paralysis, you weaken the cycle. You break the pattern. You begin to reclaim, little by little, access to your strength. You don't need to feel 100% ready to validate your potential. It's already there. It's already real. And it deserves to exist in the world, even if it's imperfect, incomplete, or starting slowly. The frustration of feeling stuck only exists because something inside you knows you were born for much more, and that knowing is your compass. It's not pressuring you, it's calling you, reminding you. And maybe today, right now, is the time to answer that call. With one step, one email, one sketch, one tiny move. Because that's how you begin again. One gesture at a time. Comparison is one of the most silent forms of self-sabotage, and at the same time, one of the most universal. It's nearly impossible to escape it in a world where everything is visible, where other people's achievements are just one click away, where every victory becomes a post, every milestone becomes a number, and every step becomes a comparison. You go online looking for inspiration and end up feeling small. Motivation turns into pressure. Look how far they've come becomes, look how far I still haven't. And it hurts. It hurts because you start measuring your journey by the end of someone else's. You begin to feel late, like you missed your moment, like there's no point in trying anymore, and so you freeze, not from lack of desire, but from too much self-criticism fueled by the world's display window. And it's cruel, because you completely ignore what wasn't shown. You compare your backstage to someone else's spotlight. You forget that every success comes with stumbles, mistakes, doubts, timid beginnings. You assume the other person got there because they're better, smarter, luckier. And you forget they might have just started earlier. Maybe they failed 10 times before getting it right. Maybe they also thought it wouldn't work out. But you don't see that. You only see the final result, the polished success, the already edited victory, and in the face of that, your own journey feels ridiculous. Your first step seems insignificant. Your courage feels insufficient. Comparison also awakens a subtle fear, the fear of not being original. You think, so many people are doing this already. Why me? And that thought is like an anchor. It doesn't just drag you down, it devalues your voice. It makes you forget that no one will ever do things the way only you can. Your worldview, your story, your pain, your insights, they're all unique. And even if the topic is the same, the path never is. But when you compare, you lose touch with your essence. You start copying other people's pace, their style, their outcomes. And without realizing it, you drift away from your own purpose. There's an uncomfortable truth that needs to be said. As long as you're looking too much to the side, you won't be able to build what is truly yours. Focusing on others is a form of escape. Escape from yourself, from your own blocks, from your own process. And the more you look, the more it feels like everyone else is moving fast, living fully, achieving everything, except you. But you don't know how many of those people are just performing a happiness they don't even feel. How many are feeling just like you, only pretending better. Comparison is a collective illusion that feeds individual insecurity, and you don't need to feed on that. If you must compare, let it be with who you were yesterday, with the version of you who didn't know what you know now, with the person who, even afraid, chose to continue. The only realistic standard is your own growth. Because comparison only becomes fuel when it's internal, when it's conscious, when it doesn't come from scarcity. The other can inspire you, sure. They can show you it's possible, but they can't be your ruler. Because someone else's ruler doesn't fit your journey. You're not late, you're alive. And as long as you're alive, you can begin, you can restart, you can reinvent yourself. Time is not your enemy. It's an ally to those who dare, and you don't need to run, you just need to walk. At your pace, in your rhythm, in your time. Because those who go far aren't the ones who start comparing, they're the ones who start by respecting themselves. There's a romanticized idea about beginnings, that they must start with confidence, with excitement, with absolute certainty. As if a true beginning only happens when fear is gone, when anxiety has disappeared, when everything feels perfectly aligned. But that's a lie, a paralyzing myth. Because in real life, almost every beginning happens with fear, with doubt, with trembling hands, with a chest tight with uncertainty. And yet, they are still beginnings. They still count. They still transform. Waiting for fear to disappear before taking action is like waiting for the sea to be completely calm before learning how to swim. It's an illusion that robs you of the chance to grow through the process itself. Fear is not the enemy. It's a sign that something matters, that you're about to leave your comfort zone, to expose yourself, to step into unknown territory. And it's natural to feel fear in the face of that. But fear only becomes a barrier when you treat it like your boss, when you let it dictate your pace, your limits, your decisions. When you make it a higher authority than your desire to live. Fear needs to be heard, yes, but not blindly obeyed. Because it speaks of your past pain, not your possible future. It protects, but it also restricts. And when you listen to it too much, it becomes the owner of your story. And you start living like someone asking for permission to exist. But the truth is, courage is not the absence of fear. It's movement in the presence of fear. It's choosing to say, yes, I'm terrified, but I'm going to try anyway. It's the strength to rise with a pounding heart, with a trembling voice, with doubt in your eyes, but with a firm decision to break out of stagnation. It's understanding that no step is too small when it's the first, that simply moving already breaks entire cycles of silence, self-sabotage, and invisibility. And little by little, the fear shrinks, not because you defeated it, but because you stopped feeding it with your paralysis. Those who begin with fear learn to trust themselves more deeply, because that trust doesn't come from the certainty that things will work out. It comes from the experience of realizing that even trembling, you managed. Even doubting, you acted. Even wanting to quit, you went. And that is power. A power that's only built along the way, never before it. No theory, no plan, no advice replaces the impact of a real step. And that step doesn't have to be massive. It can be an email sent, a video uploaded, a request made, a door opened. What matters is not the size, it's the choice to move. If you're waiting to feel fully ready before starting, maybe you need to change the question. Instead of asking, am I prepared? Ask, can I try even with fear? Because the answer to that question is almost always yes. And that yes opens doors, it begins chapters, it changes trajectories. You don't need to start with confidence. You can start with fear, with shame, with shakiness. You just can't keep denying yourself the right to fully exist, the right to try, the right to be seen, the right to fail and grow. In the end, most success stories started with someone saying, I'll go, even afraid. And it's that kind of courage that changes the world, starting from within. We've been conditioned to believe that we should only act when we're sure, when we know exactly what we're doing, when we have all the answers, when the risks are minimal. But that logic is a trap. Because certainty at its core is a comfortable illusion. Life never comes with guarantees. No choice is shielded from failure. No decision comes with a guaranteed happy ending. And waiting for certainty to act is like trying to cross a bridge that only builds itself as you walk. True clarity only appears along the way, not at the start. Direction reveals itself in motion, and choosing not to move because there's still doubt is choosing to live trapped between your dreams and your fears. Action then is an act of courage, not because you're confident, but because you're vulnerable. You're exposed to failure, to judgment, to frustration, and yet you choose to go. You choose to do. You choose not to let fear decide for you, and that choice changes everything. Because movement transforms. It reorganizes your mind, resets your emotions, revives parts of you that were frozen. While you're standing still, doubt grows, anxiety brews, fear feeds. But when you act, even with a hesitant step, the cycle shifts. You stop being the victim of delay and become the author of your own story. There's real magic in the act of doing, in standing up, writing, sending, building, because action breaks the spell of stagnation. And more than that, it reconnects you with the strength that inertia has taken away. You begin to see that you don't need to master everything to begin. You don't need to be brilliant to be relevant. You don't need a guarantee to have value. Acting means engaging with the present, with what's possible today, with what's already within reach, even if imperfect, even if incomplete. And from there, you create space for the new, because the new doesn't arise where there's rigidity. It's born where there's movement. And yes, sometimes taking action will hurt. It will go wrong. It will frustrate you. But those pains are teachers. They are seeds of wisdom that only sprout in the soil of experience. Those who protect themselves too much from failure also protect themselves from learning. Those who avoid pain also avoid growth. There is no evolution without exposure, and there is no story without risk. If you want to live something meaningful, you have to accept that part of it will be unpredictable. That part of it will come without a manual. That part of it will challenge you deeply. But that challenge is what transforms you. It's what takes you from being a spectator and turns you into the protagonist. You don't need to know the whole path to start walking. You just need enough courage for the first step. And that step doesn't require certainty. It requires surrender. It requires presence. It requires a willingness to make mistakes, adjust, and keep going. Because the truth is, the world changes when you change, and you only change when you act. Overthinking, overplanning, overwaiting, all of it might feel like caution, but sometimes it's just fear in disguise. And the antidote to fear is not perfection, it's movement. It's looking at the unknown and saying, I don't know what will happen, but I'm going. And that on its own is already a miracle of courage. There is a kind of emotional prison that many people live in without even realizing it. The prison of waiting for everything to be ideal before they allow themselves to truly live. The ideal time, the ideal body, the ideal salary, the ideal relationship, the ideal energy, creativity, motivation. But that ideal never arrives because it isn't real. It's a reflection of expectations you've built based on unreachable standards, unfair comparisons, and mental fantasies. And while you insist on only accepting the ideal, you reject what's already within your reach. You stop enjoying what's possible. You stop living in the now. And without noticing, you build your whole life on when I can, when things are better, when I'm in the right place. But life doesn't wait, and the ideal is often just an elegant disguise to keep you paralyzed. The idea of the ideal also acts as a shield, because it's easier to believe you're not ready yet than to face the risk of trying and failing. I just haven't started because I want to do it right, you tell yourself. But deep down, the fear is that you'll begin and not be good enough. That fear feeds on the fantasy that someday you'll be perfect, and only then will you be worthy of acting. That thought is cruel because it traps you in an endless cycle of self-demand. You're never ready because there's always something missing. And meanwhile, life goes on. Opportunities slip by, courage fades, and the time you were saving for the ideal becomes regret. Letting go of the ideal doesn't mean giving up on your dreams. It means giving up rigidity. It means understanding that what you can build with the tools you have today is already valuable, already enough to begin. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be finished. It has to be real. And real only happens when you take a step, even if clumsy, even if incomplete, even if afraid. The possible is where life lives. It's where projects gain substance, where ideas take shape, where your potential begins to breathe. If you keep waiting for the ideal scenario, you'll keep living in the draft version. But real life doesn't happen in the draft. It happens in the attempt. You need to understand that nothing big starts big. Every amazing project was once a blank page. Every admirable professional was once inexperienced. Every creator was once someone trembling at their first time. And what made the difference? The decision to begin with what they had, to accept imperfection, to do it however they could, and only then to improve. Growth is a result of practice, not expectation, and practice only begins when you let go of the idea that you have to be brilliant from the very first step. You only get good by doing, only improve by doing, only discover yourself by doing. The ideal will never give you that, but the possible will. When you choose the possible, you choose freedom. The freedom to make mistakes, to adjust, to change course. The freedom to not have to know everything to deserve to begin. The freedom to be human. The ideal imprisons. The possible liberates. And it's in that space of acceptance that real creative power is born. Because when you understand that you can do it your way, in your own time, with the resources you already have, the world opens up. And what once seemed distant, unreachable, impossible, begins to take shape before your eyes. Not as a miracle, but as a consequence of your commitment. There's a cruel tendency to undervalue everything that doesn't look grand, as if only what explodes, impresses, or goes viral is worth it. But the truth is that transformation doesn't begin with an epic shift. It begins with small, almost invisible steps, with quiet decisions, with movements that in other people's eyes might look like nothing, but for someone who's been stuck for a long time, they mean everything. The small step you took today might not change the world, but it's already starting to change yours. And that's how anything lasting is built, step by step, with patience, with repetition, with the humility to start from where you can. The idea that it's only worth acting when you can take huge leaps is one of the greatest enemies of real progress, because it paralyzes you. It convinces you that doing nothing is better than doing something small. But that's a lie. A small action is infinitely more powerful than a big idea that never happens. One written page is worth more than a dreamed book. One posted video is worth more than a brilliant idea stuck in your mind. One request for help is worth more than a perfect strategy kept in a drawer. What changes your reality isn't the intensity of the step, it's its consistency. It's the daily choice not to remain still. And the most beautiful thing is that small steps teach you. Every attempt brings clarity. Every action reveals something your thoughts never would. You can plan for years, imagine all scenarios, but only in the doing do you discover who you are, what you like, what works. And even when it doesn't work, you learn. And that learning, however small it may seem, strengthens you, matures you, prepares you for the next steps. That's how a journey is built, not with bursts of energy, but with a succession of possible movements. Today, one sentence. Tomorrow, one page. Then a chapter. And before you know it, you're writing an entire story. Many people give up before even trying because they underestimate the value of now. They wait for the right day, the right money, the right courage. But what they don't realize is that the right day doesn't come. It's built. And it's built with what you have, with what fits today. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be sincere. Consistency is born from the real, not the ideal. And by choosing to act even a little, you begin to reshape your identity. You stop being someone who only thinks and become someone who does. And that changes everything. You don't need to change the world today, or your whole life. You just need to take one step. And that step doesn't have to be huge. It just needs to be true, because the true brings you closer to yourself. It reminds you of what matters. It pulls you out of autopilot. And every time you honor a small step, you're telling the universe and yourself that you're ready for the new, ready to grow, ready to move out of stagnation. And it's through this sequence of small choices that the greatest destinations are revealed. There's a quiet, almost childlike belief that the future will solve everything. That tomorrow will come as a silent redeemer, fixing our delays, healing our wounds, opening magical doors to everything that seems impossible today. But tomorrow by itself changes nothing. What changes tomorrow is what you choose to do or not do today. If you plant nothing now, tomorrow will only bring more of the same. If you keep waiting for a miracle, time will keep slipping through your fingers, taking with it every opportunity you postponed. Because the truth is hard. No one is coming to save you. No one will appear with a perfect map. No one will hand you the life you want if you're not willing to build it with the bricks you have right now. Tomorrow only becomes different when today is lived with presence, with decision, with movement. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be grand, but it needs to be real. It needs to come from you. Because as long as you keep waiting to feel ready, keep feeding the idea that the right time hasn't come yet, time will keep moving on and taking parts of you with it. The courage you didn't use, the ideas you didn't test, the paths you never walked. Tomorrow has no commitment to your dreams. It only responds to your actions. And if there's no action, it will repeat yesterday, quietly, on loop. It's cruel but necessary to say, life won't wait for you. And it won't slow down just because you're still preparing. At some point you'll have to decide whether you want to keep collecting excuses or start collecting experiences, whether you want to keep feeding fear or make space for courage. Because living isn't about always being right, it's about always being willing to try, to fail, to adjust, to keep going. What's holding you back today isn't a lack of talent or time or resources. It's the illusion that tomorrow you'll be someone else, that tomorrow you'll magically have the strength you haven't dared to build now. But what if you did things differently today? What if you broke the pattern? What if, instead of postponing one more time, you simply decided to begin? With everything you feel, with everything you lack, with everything that already exists. Maybe you can't do it all yet, but you can do something. And that something could be the beginning of the rest of your life, because one choice changes everything. One choice today changes all your tomorrows. And that's power. The power to leave waiting behind and claim authorship of your own story. You don't need permission. You don't need approval. You just need to look at yourself honestly and ask, how long will I keep living in almost? How long will I let my dreams gather dust in a drawer, waiting for a future that never arrives? The present is calling you, and not because it's perfect, but because it's all that exists. The rest is projection, and you deserve to live. You deserve to try. You deserve to feel the freedom of existing fully, even if trembling. Tomorrow won't save you, but your decision today might.